Nova Scotia, late autumn, 1891. The harbor at Dunmarrow held its breath before winter. Fishing boats rocked against the pilings, their hulls gray with salt and season, their nets folded and still. The spruce trees on the headland stood dark against a sky, the color of old pewter, and the wind off the Atlantic came in steady and cold, smelling of distance and things left unfinished. Calloway House sat at the top of the bluff, above the village and above its gossip. It was a large house for one man, with enough rooms to lose yourself in, and enough silence to find yourself again whether you wanted to or not. The windows faced east toward the water, and on mornings when the fog lay thick over the harbor, the house seemed to float above the world entirely. Edmund Calloway had lived there alone for 7 years. He was 43, broad through the shoulders, with hands that showed their work, and a face that had forgotten how to expect good news. The village knew him as a fair man. He ran the timber yard, paid honest wages, kept his accounts clean. He greeted people by name. He attended church on the first Sunday of each month. Not from devotion, he would have said, but from habit, and because the pew had been his father's. He was not unfriendly. He was simply sealed, the way a house is sealed against a long winter. Everything tucked in, shutters latched, drafts stopped up, nothing wasted on the cold outside. His wife Catherine had died in the autumn of 1884, 2 months after their son. The boy had been called James, and he had lived only 11 days. Catherine had lived 3 weeks longer, and then the house on the bluff had gone quiet and stayed that way. Edmund had not spoken of them to anyone since the first year. The village had learned not to ask. His housekeeper, Mrs. Plimpton, kept the kitchen warm and the floors swept, and the subject of the past carefully out of her conversation. She had worked at Calloway House for 5 years and had never once ventured past the first landing without being invited, which she never was. She was a sensible woman who understood that some rooms were not locked for lack of a key, but for very good reason, and it was not her place to ask what the reason was. The young man who helped with the yard, Reuben, knew better than to chatter. He did his work, took his pay, and went home to his mother down on the shore road. He liked Edmund well enough, in the way a person likes a cliff, steady, present, impossible to get close to without risk. The morning the boy arrived was a Tuesday. Edmund remembered it as a Tuesday because he had been going over the timber accounts, which he always did on Tuesdays, and because the fog was so thick that morning that when he looked up from his desk, he could see nothing from the window but a wall of gray, as though the world had simply declined to continue past the glass. Mrs. Plimpton called from below. Her voice had a quality he had learned to read the way sailors read weather, and that morning it said something has happened that I do not know how to explain. He came downstairs. She was standing at the open door, her apron twisted in her hands. On the step, half visible in the fog, stood a boy of perhaps 8 or 9. He was wearing a coat too thin for the season and boots that had come apart at the left seam and been sewn back together with what appeared to be twine. His hair was dark and needed cutting. His eyes were steady in a way that children's eyes rarely are, the steadiness of a person who has had to pay attention for a long time and learned that looking away is a luxury. He was holding something in both hands. "He asked for you by name," Mrs. Plimpton said quietly. "By your full name." Edmund looked at the boy. "Come inside," he said. The boy stepped in without hesitation, which Edmund noted. A child who had been uncertain would have hesitated. This one walked like a person who had been walking toward a specific place for a long time and was relieved to have arrived. Mrs. Plimpton closed the door on the cold. "What's your name?" Edmund asked. "August," the boy said. "August Whitmore. And who sent you here, August?" The boy looked at him for a moment, measuring something. Then he held out what he had been carrying. It was a pocket watch. Silver, worn smooth at the edges from years of handling. The chain was broken and had been knotted back together twice. Edmund took it from the boy's hands with the careful attention a person gives a thing he does not yet understand. He turned it over. On the back, engraved in letters he recognized at once because he had chosen them himself 20 years ago, before everything, EAC. Dunmarrow, NS his initials, his home, his watch. He had given it to Catherine on their 4th anniversary. She had laughed and told him it was not customary to give a woman a man's pocket watch. He had told her that was why he had done it. She had worn it on a ribbon around her neck until the chain broke, and he had replaced it with a proper one, and then she had kept it in the drawer beside her bed and taken it out when she couldn't sleep. He knew this because he had watched her do it, without her knowing he was watching. He had assumed it burned with everything else in the fire that took the Whitmore Road cottage 6 years back. He had been told it burned. He had been told that 2 people were in the cottage when the fire started, a woman named Whitmore and a young boy, her son. He had been told they had not come out. He looked up from the watch. The boy was watching him with those steady, careful eyes. "Where did you get this?" Edmund asked. His voice came out quieter than he intended. "My mother kept it," August said. "She said if anything happened to her, I should find the man whose name is on the back. She said he would know what it meant." He paused. "She said he was a good man. She said that twice, so I'd remember." Edmund sat down in the chair by the door. He was not generally a man who needed to sit down, but he sat down now. "Your mother," he said carefully. "Her name?" "Clara," the boy said. "Clara Whitmore, but her name before was different. She didn't talk about that much." A pause. "She got sick in the spring. She's at the Sisters' Hospital in Halifax. She told me to come here before." He stopped. "Straightened, she said the road was long, but I was longer than the road." Mrs. Plimpton made a sound behind her hand that she covered quickly with a cough. Edmund set the watch on his knee and looked at it. The fog pressed against the window glass. The house ticked around them, slow and even. He knew the name Clara Whitmore. He had known it 7 years ago, in a different way than he knew it now. Clara had come to Dunmarrow in the summer of 1884, 2 months before Catherine died. Or rather, 2 months before he had been told Catherine died. She had arrived on the mail boat from Halifax, with a small trunk and a letter of reference from a minister in Truro, and taken a room above the chandler's shop on Harbor Street. She had worked as a seamstress. She had been quiet, careful with money, and private in the way of a person who had been taught that too much visibility was dangerous. He had not known her well. He had known her the way a man in a closed-off harbor town knows a newcomer, by sight, by occasional exchange, by the particular attention the village paid to her that she seemed not to notice or not to welcome. She had stayed on Harbor Street for 2 years. Then she had moved out to the Whitmore Road cottage, 4 miles from the village. Then, in the winter of 1888, the cottage had burned. He had been told there were no survivors. "August," he said, "how did you get here from Halifax?" "Coach to Truro," the boy said, matter of fact. "Then I walked to Pictou, because I didn't have enough left for the stage. A farmer took me as far as the Dunmarrow crossroads and said to follow the shore road until I saw the Bluff House. You walked from Pictou?" "Mama said, hard roads don't last forever. She said the only way out is through." He looked at Edmund steadily. "Are you the man from the watch?" Edmund's throat felt strange. "Yes," he said. Something shifted in the boy's face. Not relief exactly, but the release of a tension held so long it had become invisible. "Then she was right," August said quietly. "She said you'd know what to do." Mrs. Plimpton had moved to the kitchen doorway, and Edmund could see from the set of her shoulders that she was fighting hard to keep her face composed. Reuben, who had come in from the yard for the noon meal, stood near the stove with his cap in his hands and his eyes very deliberately on the floor. Edmund stood. "We'll get you something warm," he said. "Then you'll tell me everything." The boy ate like a person who has been managing hunger for long enough that he no longer let it show. He accepted a second bowl of soup without being asked twice and wrapped both hands around the mug of tea as though the warmth was something he intended to hold on to. He answered questions in short, careful sentences, and Edmund understood that this was not sullenness but economy. The habit of a child who had learned that words, like money, were better saved than spent carelessly. Clara Whitmore had been ill since March, a fever that had settled in her chest and refused to leave. The sisters at the hospital in Halifax had taken her in early October, after a neighbor on the Dunmarrow Road had found August alone in the farmhouse where they had been living and sent word to the parish. Clara had given August the watch before she left. She had made him memorize the name on the back. She had told him, "If I cannot come back for you, find Edmund Calloway in Dunmarrow. Tell him what the watch is. He'll know. He's a man who keeps his word." Edmund listened to all of this without interrupting. Outside, the fog had begun to thin, and the harbor was emerging piece by piece. A mast first, then the roof line of the net shed, then the long gray line of the water itself. "She talked about me," he said. It came out as a statement, but he meant it as a question. "Not much," August said honestly, "but what she said, she meant. I could tell." "How?" The boy considered this. "She said your name the way she said my grandmother's name, like it was someone she trusted but lost track of." Mrs. Plimpton put her apron up to her face and left the kitchen. Reuben developed a sudden interest in the firewood. Edmund turned toward the window. The last of the fog was breaking apart over the harbor, pale and slow, letting the afternoon light through in thin November seams. He thought of the night the news came about the Whitmore Road cottage. He thought of the particular cold of that night, and how he had stood on this bluff for a long time afterward looking south, and how the darkness had looked final. He thought of Catherine. He thought of the watch, which he had last seen in the drawer by her bed. He turned back to the boy. "How long since you've slept indoors?" August looked at the ceiling briefly, calculating. 4 days, then you'll sleep here tonight." Edmund pushed back from the table. "In the morning, I'll send a wire to Halifax." The boy looked at him with those careful eyes. "You'll find her?" "I'll find out where things stand," Edmund said. "That's the first thing. We take it one step at a time." August nodded. The motion was too adult for his face, and Edmund felt something tighten in his chest at the sight of it, the way a child carries dignity when no one else is carrying it for him. "Your mother was right about one thing," Edmund said, standing. "Just one?" August said. And despite everything, Edmund almost smiled. The spare room at the end of the upper hall had not been used. Had not been used in years. Mrs. Plimpton aired the bedding without being asked, and found a spare pair of woolen socks in the linen press that had belonged to the previous owner of the house and fit the boy well enough. She set a lamp by the bed and a cup of water on the nightstand, and then stood in the doorway for a moment looking at August with an expression she made no attempt to conceal. "Is there anything else you need?" she asked. "No, ma'am," August said. "This is already more than I expected." She pressed her lips together and nodded and went out, and Edmund heard her footsteps stop halfway down the stairs, and then resume after a pause that told him everything. He himself sat up late in the study, with the watch on the desk before him, and the lamp turned low. He had not opened the watch again. He did not need to. He had read the inscription the first time, and that was enough to last for a while. He knew what the watch meant. He had given it to Catherine 7 years ago, on the anniversary of the day they had met. He had not told anyone that part. Not the date, not the occasion, not the reason. The engraving was his initials and his town. Nothing more. Nothing that would mean anything to a stranger. Clara Whitmore had known whose watch it was. Clara Whitmore had kept it for 7 years and told her son to bring it here. Edmund was a careful, methodical man. He had built his business on the habit of not drawing conclusions before the evidence warranted them. He sat with that habit now and turned the known facts over slowly, one at a time, the way a man sorts lumber, checking the grain, checking for rot, checking whether the piece will bear weight. Catherine had been ill after James died, very ill, the kind of illness that made strangers in the village speak softly when he passed. He had been told gently by Dr. Hamish Boyle, who had retired now and moved to Ontario, that she had slipped away in the night of the 14th of October, 1884, and that it had been peaceful. Edmund had not been there. He had been at the timber yard, dealing with a dispute over a lumber order, and by the time Boyle's message reached him, it was over. He had gone to the room where she had been and found the bed empty, the sheets stripped, the window open. Boyle had said it was too far gone to wait. He had been told she was buried in the churchyard at Millhaven, 20 miles north. He had gone and stood at the grave and felt nothing for a long time, and then felt everything at once, and then felt nothing again, and sealed the whole of it away. Behind the face he showed the world. He had never thought to question it. He did not think of himself as a man who was easily deceived. He thought of himself as a man who trusted the word of a doctor, a churchman, a community. He thought of himself as a man who had grieved correctly and moved on correctly and kept his house in order correctly, which was all he knew how to do. But the watch was on his desk, and the boy was asleep upstairs, and Clara Whitmore had kept a secret for 7 years and spent her last clear-headed days making sure it found its way home. He sat with that until the fire went to coals. Then he went to bed and lay awake until the gray light came up over the water, and then he rose and went downstairs and wrote 3 letters before breakfast. The telegraph office in Dunmarrow was run by a man named Prescott, who was professionally incurious and constitutionally discreet, qualities Edmund had always appreciated and now valued more than usual. He sent 2 wires, one to the Sisters of Charity Hospital in Halifax, addressed to the matron, asking for word of a patient named Clara Whitmore admitted in October. The second to Dr. Boyle's last known address in Guelph, Ontario, asking a question he had not known he needed to ask for 7 years. He bought lemon drops at the dry goods store, because August had looked at the jar with a child's careful non-looking that meant wanting without asking. He brought them back to the house without comment and set them on the kitchen table. August found them and said, "Thank you," with a formality that made Mrs. Plimpton turn back to the stove very quickly. They waited 3 days. Edmund did not tell August why, exactly, they were waiting. He told him only that he had sent inquiries, and that inquiries took time, and that in the meantime there was the house, the yard, the harbor at low tide, and a considerable quantity of firewood that Reuben had split but not yet stacked. August stacked firewood with the focused application of a person glad to have something useful to do. Reuben worked beside him and said very little, which was the right instinct. Mrs. Plimpton fed them both without fuss and pretended not to watch August's face across the supper table, with the transparent unsuccess of a woman who was watching very closely. On the morning of the 4th day, Prescott sent a boy up the bluff road with 2 envelopes. Edmund read them both in his study with the door closed. The first was from the matron at the Sisters of Charity. Clara Whitmore was alive. She had been admitted in the first week of October with a severe infection of the lungs. She had been gravely ill through most of November. She was, as of the date of writing, mending. Slowly, unevenly, with the 2 steps forward and 1 step back that the matron described in the neutral tone of someone accustomed to not making promises. She was, however, improving. Her mind was sound. She had asked about her son daily since the fever broke. Edmund read the second letter. Then he sat for a long time looking at the harbor. The water was steel gray and flat, the sky pressing down close and heavy with the first proper threat of snow. A pair of herring gulls rode the wind above the net sheds, banking and tipping, effortless. He called August in. The boy stood in the doorway of the study with the careful posture of a person prepared for bad news. Edmund had seen that posture before, on men who had come to settle accounts they feared they could not afford. He did not make August wait. "Your mother is alive," he said. "She is getting better. She asked about you." August's face did not collapse. It did not crumple or break open the way faces do in stories. It went very still, and then his jaw tightened, and then, with a precision that looked like enormous effort, he blinked twice. "Okay," he said. His voice was steady. Then, after a moment, "Okay." Edmund gave him a moment. "I'm going to Halifax," he said, "to bring her home." August looked up sharply. "Here, that is my intention," Edmund said. "If she is willing." He paused. "And if you are?" The boy stood in the doorway of the study in his too-thin coat, with his hair still needing cutting and the lemon drop in his cheek making the faintest bulge, and said nothing for long enough that Edmund thought he had perhaps misjudged the offer. Then August said, very quietly, "She said you were a man who keeps his word. I try to be." She was right about more than one thing then. Edmund reached for his coat from the rack by the door. The road to Halifax was 2 days by stage in good weather. In late November, with the first snow already threatening the high ground, it was longer. Edmund took Reuben to drive, because Reuben was steady with horses in poor weather and said almost nothing on long drives, which suited the occasion. They left before first light. August stood on the porch step in the lamplight, Mrs. Plimpton behind him with her hands on his shoulders, not restraining, just present. "I'll bring her," Edmund said. "I know," said August. He did not wave. He simply watched, which Edmund found he preferred. The road south was iron-hard with frost, the fields on either side colorless and still. Black spruce lined the ridges. Crows lifted from fence posts as the wagon passed and resettled behind them. Reuben drove without speaking, which Edmund was grateful for. He had time to think. He had brought the second letter with him, folded inside his coat, though he did not need to reread it. He had memorized it, the way you memorize something that rearranges the ground under your feet. Boyle's letter was careful. Boyle was a careful man who had spent a career being careful, and Edmund could feel the care in every sentence. The doctor wrote that he had thought about this for some time. He wrote that he had carried it for years and had not known what to do with it. He wrote that what he had to say could not be unsaid, and he wished Edmund to understand that he had acted at the time as he believed was right, though he acknowledged now that right was perhaps too simple a word for what he had done. Catherine, Boyle wrote, had not died in October of 1884. She had been, in his medical assessment at the time, very likely to die. The fever had been severe, the recovery uncertain. She had been unconscious for 11 days. By the 14th of October, Boyle had believed that death was a matter of hours, and he had said so to the family. Catherine's older sister, Maud, who had come from New Brunswick and who had taken charge of things with a brisk authority that Boyle had found, in retrospect, unusual. It was Maud who had told him Catherine was gone. It was Maud who had arranged the interment notice. It was Maud who had pressed the matter with a firmness that Boyle, exhausted and credulous, had not questioned. Catherine had, in fact, recovered, incompletely, with memory impaired by the fever and a frailness that lasted 2 years. But she had recovered. Where she had gone after that, Boyle wrote. He did not know. He had not known until this letter arrived that she might be found under a different name, in a cottage on the Dunmarrow Road, 4 miles from her own husband for 2 full years. He wrote that he was sorry. He wrote it twice. Edmund folded the letter back into his coat and looked at the road ahead, which was long and straight, and vanished into the gray distance of the Nova Scotia interior, leafless and cold and entirely indifferent to the weight of what he was carrying. He thought about Maud, whom he had met twice and disliked on both occasions. Maud, who had left before the interment notice ran in the paper. Maud, who had, he understood now, arranged a kind of ending for a marriage she had apparently decided should end, using the efficient instrument of a man who trusted medicine and grief to do its work. He thought about Clara Whitmore arriving in Dunmarrow 2 months after that, quiet and careful, seamstress and private, living 4 miles from a husband who believed her dead and never once. Because the cottage fire had confirmed it, the 2 witnesses had confirmed it, the village had confirmed it. Thought to look. He thought about a boy with careful eyes, carrying a pocket watch across 100 miles of November. He thought, of course she sent him here. She couldn't come herself. She was ill, she was alone, and she had. He understood this now with a clarity that felt like something finally coming level. She had trusted him even from a distance she had not chosen. He pulled the watch from his coat and held it in his gloved hand. The silver was warm from his body. He did not open it. He just held it and let the road move beneath the wheels and did not look away from what was coming. The Sisters of Charity Hospital stood at the edge of the city, a long wooden building painted white, surrounded by bare elms that rattled in the harbor wind. Edmund went in alone. He had asked Reuben to wait with the horses. A young nun with quick eyes met him at the door. He gave his name. She left and returned with the matron, a tall woman with a manner that suggested she had seen every version of human complicated and was neither surprised nor moved by any of them. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "you've come from Dunmarrow." "I have. She's been asking about her son every day since the 17th. "He's safe," Edmund said. "He's at my house. I have a housekeeper who—" He stopped because the words he was trying to organize were more numerous than the situation required. "He is well," he said simply. "He found me." The matron studied him for a moment with the specific attention of a woman trying to determine what category of problem she was looking at. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her. "Come with me," she said. The room was clean and spare, sunlight crossing the floor in pale winter angles. There were 4 beds. 3 were empty. The 4th was by the window. She was thinner than he remembered. Her hair had grown out past her shoulders and was threaded with gray. That had not been there in 1884. Her face was pale but not lifeless, the face of a person who had been very ill and had decided, stubbornly, to be less so. She was sitting up, a book closed in her lap, looking at the door when he came in, as though she had been listening for it. Her eyes found his. For a moment, neither of them moved. He had rehearsed nothing. He had decided on the road that there was no correct version of this conversation, and that it was better to arrive honest than prepared. "Catherine," he said. Something moved across her face, old, complicated, frightened, and then, underneath all of it, undeniable, relief. "Edmund." Her voice was low and a little rough, the way voices are after long illness. "You came. Your son brought me a watch," he said. He moved into the room and stood near the foot of the bed, not close enough to crowd her, close enough to be clear. "It took me a few days to understand what he was telling me." She looked at her hands. "I didn't. There wasn't a way to—" "You don't have to explain everything today," he said. She looked up sharply. He thought she had expected something else. Perhaps anger, perhaps the careful withdrawal of a man who felt deceived. He had felt that, somewhere in those 2 days on the road. He had moved through it the way you move through cold water, not without feeling it but without stopping. "August is safe," he said. "He is extraordinary, your son. You should know that. He walked from Pictou in November." Her eyes filled. She did not look away. "He's stubborn," she said. The ghost of something, not quite a smile, but the shape where a smile had once lived, moved across her face. "He comes by it honestly. So I understand." She studied him. "Edmund, I have been. I don't remember all of it. The fever took pieces. There are years that are clear and years that are thin, worn through in places." She pressed her hands flat on the quilt. "But I remember giving him the watch. I remember thinking that if I had done nothing else right in 7 years, at least I could put that in his hands and send him to you." Edmund sat down in the chair beside her bed, the chair of a man prepared to stay. "Maud arranged things," he said. "It was not a question." She closed her eyes briefly. "She believed she was protecting me. She believed," a pause. "Maud had opinions about my choices, about this life. She acted on them. I know. You got Boyle's letter." "I did." She opened her eyes. They were the same, gray-green, steady, with that quality he had always valued in her, the quality of looking directly at things even when it was easier not to. "I moved to the Dunmarrow Road because I couldn't go further," she said quietly. "I told myself I would leave. Every spring I told myself. And then I didn't." The winter light shifted across the floor between them. From somewhere in the hospital came the sound of voices, low and ordinary, the particular sound of a building that is engaged in the work of keeping people alive. "I need to know one thing," Edmund said. "Did you intend for August to find me?" "The moment I understood I might not get better," she said. "Yes, without reservation." He looked at the watch in his hand. Then he set it on the nightstand between them, where the light fell on the engraving. "Then when you're well enough," he said, "we'll go home." She looked at the watch, then at him. "Edmund, one step at a time," he said. "That's what I told August. It's true for this as well." She was quiet for a long moment. The thin winter sun moved another inch across the floor. "He really walked from Pictou?" she said, without complaint apparently. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was clearly its immediate predecessor. "Stubborn," she said again, and this time the shape where the smile had been became the smile itself, brief and real and entirely hers. "We'll leave when the matron permits," Edmund said. "I have a wagon and a man who doesn't talk on long drives, which I recommend. And August, he's at Calloway House? Mrs. Plimpton is feeding him into good health," Edmund said. "He has been very polite about it and has stacked a considerable amount of firewood." Catherine looked at her hands again, and when she looked up, her eyes were bright in a way that illness hadn't put there. "I used to look at the light on the harbor from the Whitmore Road," she said quietly. "At night, I used to be able to see the Bluff House from the upper window." Edmund said nothing. He did not need to say anything. "All right," she said. "All right. We go home." They left 3 days later when the matron was satisfied. Catherine walked out on her own, slowly, one hand on Edmund's arm, not from weakness but from the particular steadiness that one person offers another when the ground is unfamiliar. The air was cold and clean, carrying the smell of salt and coming snow. Reuben held the horses and kept his eyes on the harness. Edmund helped her up into the wagon. She settled herself, wrapped in the blanket he had brought, and looked south along the road. "Is it a long way?" she asked. 2 days, he said. "Longer if the snow comes in." "Then let it," she said. "We have time." They traveled the first day without much speaking. The road unwound through bare hardwood and spruce, through villages where the smoke from chimneys rose straight in the still air, through lowlands where ice had started to form at the edges of the streams. Catherine watched the land pass with a steadiness that Edmund found he was grateful for. Not the silence of damage, but the silence of a person thinking through something large, quietly and with patience. That evening they stopped at a farmhouse that took travelers, Tralmochen, questions run by a woman named Pettigrew, and set 2 plates on the table and a lamp between them. Catherine ate with the deliberate appetite of someone being careful not to overdo it. Edmund ate and watched the window and said nothing about what he was thinking, which was more than could be said for earlier in his life. "You're still not a talker," Catherine said, without looking up from her plate. "I never was, Chow. I know." A pause. "I found I missed it." He looked at her. "The silence," she said. "Yours was never empty." She set down her fork. "Edmund, there is a great deal I owe you by way of." "You owe me nothing," he said. She looked at him steadily. "I disappeared for 7 years." "You were disappeared," he said. "There's a difference." She was quiet for a moment. "Maud meant it kindly," she said. "That is the part that is hard to be angry about. She believed she was giving me a door out of a life she thought was wrong for me. She took the choice from me to give me freedom. She did not understand that the choice was the point." "No," Edmund said. "She did not." "I should have come back," Catherine said. "When I was well enough to understand clearly, I should have come to you. I kept finding reasons." "I know," he said. He did not say. "I understand," he said. "I know," which was true and more precise, and she had always been a woman who appreciated precision. "Were you angry?" she asked. "On the road up," he said. "I worked through it." She almost smiled. 2 days is enough for you?" "I'm thorough," he said. "It doesn't take long." This time she did smile, and it stayed. They arrived at Dunmarrow on the afternoon of the 2nd day, just as the sun was dropping toward the spruce ridge and turning the harbor gold. The village looked small and permanent, the way it always looked from the South Road. A gathering of gray rooftops and white church spire, and a long line of fishing boats along the wharf, the whole of it cupped in the arms of the headland as though the land itself had decided to keep it. Reuben said, "First time on the whole journey." Home. Edmund said nothing, neither did Catherine, but she sat forward on the wagon seat, Ringer Rye wagon, both hands on the board in front of her, and looked at the water, and the bluff, and the house on the ridge with an expression that Edmund did not try to name because it was not a single thing, and did not deserve to be reduced to one. He called up to the house when they turned into the yard. He did not need to call twice. August came out the front door at something faster than a walk, but slower than a run, the particular speed of a person who has decided that dignity matters, but has also decided it matters less than this. He came down the porch steps and across the yard and stopped 2 feet from the wagon and looked up at his mother and said nothing at all. Catherine came down from the wagon with Edmund's hand, and then she was down in the yard, and August walked the last 2 feet, and she caught him, both arms, and held him the way that needs no translation and cannot be improved upon. She said his name. Once, twice, several more times, quietly. Into the top of his dark head, he said, against her coat. I found him. I know, she said. I know you did. He keeps his word, I know that too, Mrs. Plimpton stood at the top of the porch steps, with her apron in both hands, and made no attempt at all to hide what her face was doing. Reuben stood at the horses' heads and looked at the sky with the studied attention of a man absolutely not watching what was happening in the yard behind him. Edmund stood a few feet back, his hat in his hand, and looked at the harbor and the last of the light on the water. The house behind him, he realized, was making the same sounds it made any other evening. The creak of timbers settling, the sound of the stove from the kitchen, the particular quiet of a building that knows itself. But, underneath all of it, or through all of it, something that had been missing was present again, not loud, not announced, simply there. Catherine looked up and found his eyes over August's head. She had been crying. She was not apologizing for it. She was simply looking at him the way a person looks when words are a poor substitute for the fact of being in the same place. He gave her a moment. Then he put his hat back on and said, "Supper will be ready." She laughed, not the shape of a laugh, the full thing, real and tired and warm, and August's shoulders loosened in her arms in a way that told Edmund the boy had been holding more than he'd let anyone see. "Then let's go in," she said. Inside, the lamps were lit, and the kitchen was warm with the smell of bread and the particular homeliness of a house that has been looked after. Mrs. Plimpton became very busy and very brisk and managed, admirably, to be in 3 places at once and to hide her face in the steam of the pot for long enough to collect herself. August sat beside his mother at the table and ate with an ease Edmund had not seen from him before. The ease of a person no longer conserving against uncertainty, no longer prepared for the meal to be the last good thing. Catherine ate slowly and looked around the table with a quality of attention that Edmund understood. She was memorizing it, not because she was afraid it would be taken from her again, but because she had learned, the hard way, over years, that the present moment was worth the full weight of your attention. After supper, when August's eyes had grown heavy, and Mrs. Plimpton had guided him upstairs with the unargued authority of a woman who had discovered in 4 days that she felt strongly about this particular child, Edmund and Catherine sat by the fire in the parlor. He had not lit that fire in years. Reuben had laid it without being asked, which Edmund noted and intended to acknowledge in the morning. It was quiet between them for a while. Not the old sealed quiet of the house, but a different kind, the kind that has room in it. "There are things I don't remember clearly," Catherine said eventually. "The fever years are patchy. There are places where I'm not sure what happened and what I constructed from what I was told." "We'll go slowly," Edmund said. She looked at the fire. "I remember this room," she said. "I remember the curtains were different. I changed them after." He paused. "I can change them back." "No," she said. "This is fine. This is yours. This is the house you lived in." "It's your house too," he said. "It was always your house too." She was quiet. Then, "Edmund, what do you want from this?" He considered it the way he considered everything important, without rushing, Without pretending, the answer was simpler than it was. "I want what I always wanted," he said. "I would like us to be a family. I would like you and August to be here, and to be safe, and to have time." He looked at her. "The rest we can figure out as we go. I'm not in a hurry." "7 years and you're not in a hurry," she said. There was something dry in it, a little wondering. "I've been waiting without knowing it," he said. "I can wait while knowing. It's easier." The fire moved between them, slow and warm. Catherine reached across and set her hand over his where it rested on the arm of the chair. Not tight, not desperate, just there. The same way the house was there. The same way the harbor was there, outside in the dark, steady and present and unchanging. "All right," she said. "We'll figure it out as we go." He turned his hand and held hers, and outside the November wind came off the Atlantic cold and constant, and the spruce trees on the headland moved against the dark sky, and Calloway House, which had been quiet for a very long time, breathed.